So hello and welcome to the first 1000 days free introductory webinar. So the idea of this webinar is to give you a understanding of the program, who it's for, a basic structure, like we're going to go have a look at the modules, and then an understanding of the content. So the idea of building this program is for mums to educate, empower, to have a really thorough understanding of the microbiome across the first 1000 days. So the first 1000 days is the period from conception to 2 years old, and you know, this crucial stage of setting up that microbiome and the immune system that's going to impact the infant for life, and how important the microbiome is during pregnancy, also for pregnancy outcomes. So we're going to go through. So I set it up just as we're going to have a look at the structure, and then we're going to go through each of the content of the modules, and then I've got an example slide out of each of the modules, and then a couple of at the end of my favorite slides as well. So essentially we've got 8 modules, and in each module is a webinar of the main content, and that goes for about 60 minutes, anywhere between sort of 50 and 60 minutes. Tried to keep it under an hour, but there's a lot of information in there, and I sort of try, and the more I put in there, the more I think it's, you know, important to make sure everything's explained well. The other thing that I haven't put on here is there will also be a closed Facebook group that anyone that's doing the program is in, where you can have all of your questions answered. We'll do a Q&A once a week or something like that, or you can just, you know, pop your questions in there as well, and we'll build a real community of people going through the program. And then each module's also got an extra resources section, and so in that extra resources we're going to have links to books, great amazing books to read, either books that I've met the authors or interviewed the authors or read myself or been recommended from health professionals that are working in maternity care. Some great websites, some YouTubes, there's some really awesome expert interviews that I've got structured through the program, and then also some great articles, and then Instagram, Facebook professionals and groups to follow or to join. So heaps of amazing resources to really educate and empower all the things you need to know as you're moving through your pregnancy, and then that early infancy, and then sort of all the way up to your baby being 2. So I guess we'll have people in the course that are planning, that are early pregnant, that are in their 2nd and 3rd pregnancies, and so it's really got content in there that's suitable for everyone. Ideally, you would do the first 5 modules while you're still pregnant, because it's set up like 1st trimester, 2nd trimester, 3rd, 4th, birth and breastfeeding, or birth and early feeding, not just breastfeeding. So they're the first 5 modules, and we want to obviously have them done before you go into, before you actually have the baby. And then so that's up to 5, 6, 7 and 8 modules go from 3 months, 6 to 12, and then anyway, I'll show you what we're going to go through. So this is the first module 1, so first trimester, 0 to 12 weeks. So essentially it's an introduction about that first 1000 days. We do a real thorough look at gut health and the microbiome and what that is, what it looks like. Dysbiosis there is the term that means an imbalance in the microbiome. Explain all about that. What SIBO and LIBO are, which is a term to describe that imbalance in the microbiome in different parts of the digestive system. We have a really close look at leaky gut, the things that are causing that, the impact of that onto the whole body, and what that looks like. So how you might recognize if you've got an imbalance in your microbiome, and some of the risk factors for that. And then also why it's so crucial in this first 1000 days period. So we talk all about that. We look at medications and toxins, how they impact the microbiome, but how they impact the whole body, stress and trauma. We look at first trimester symptoms, also how some of the microbiome can make some of them worse, or how it's related, and actually how we can support that. Nutrient status, common deficiencies, nutritional supplements. We look at that healthy gut diet and lifestyle, so that we can really set up good practices to support your microbiome through your pregnancy and through that early infancy stage. We introduce to that about birth choices, and especially this is going to be for first time mums, you know, understanding, you know, what your birth choices are. And we're going to, it's an introduction to the birth map, which is something that is a concept to replace the birth plan, or it's a birth plan, but done in a different kind of structure format that's much more, that tends to have better results. And we've an expert interview with the developer of Birth Map, who's an amazing woman. And then we just talk about who else we might need on our team, and that we do that through every module. So this is one of the slides. So I've just got an example of one of the slides. So this is about, in module 1, about why the microbiome matters in the first 1,000 days. And this is, you know, an example of the stuff that we're going to be learning. So, you know, essentially we're giving the reason it's so important and that we need to get this information out there is that you give your microbiome to your baby. So we know that the influence is starting in pregnancy, but the first major exposure to the infant is through the birth process. Obviously, birth mode's going to impact greatly. Feeding method impacts greatly. We go through all of the differences between, you know, formula feeding, breastfeeding, and then all of the other sort of influences, how what antibiotics are doing. And so even, you know, from in pregnancy, even if it's not starting to pass to the baby, then even that the research around that is still sort of inconclusive, but we certainly know that imbalances in the microbiome during pregnancy really impact your pregnancy outcomes, things like gestational diabetes, early membrane rupture, those kind of outcomes, and others. So we'll go through all of those things, and that understanding about the mothers being the microbial custodians and how we're passing that on to our baby, and how it's super important that we get it right through these stages. So that's an example of what we're looking at in module 1. Module 2 is the second trimester. We're looking at that nutrient status management, review of supplements and diet, you know, how we get a really good microbiome supporting diet. Again, we go back and get over the gut health and microbiome, why it's so important, indicators of imbalance. We're starting to talk about pre and probiotics. So these are our best supplements that we can use to modify the microbiome and to support the microbiome outside of having that plant-based diet. Potential pregnancy complications and the risk and the associations with microbiome in there, and how we can help to reduce them, and just to be aware about of them. Again, every module's got stress and toxin reduction and medication avoidance, and you know how we can achieve that. There's a great resource into how the baby's growing in this one, and we start to talk about exercise, activity, and sleep. And I really confirm the need to have a midwife and doula, or a midwife or doula that you can rely on. A big theme through the whole program is about midwifery continuity of care, and what that is and why that gets us the best outcomes, you know, and how you can achieve that, and where your birth choices, you know, sit around that. And then, you know, refining the team. Do you need someone else? Like if you have got really serious gut issues, then you might need a nutritionist, or, you know, an integrated doctor maybe, or if you need to do some exercise and, you know, you need help with that. There's I've got a course in this one, a core and floor course. It's about the getting the core and the pelvic floor ready for, you know, preparing it for pregnancy so we can prevent injury, or you know, or then how we recover better. So lots of different resources like that. And then obviously we're going to go through, you know, a bit more about deciding your birth options and what you want your birth to look like. This is an example of a slide from the second module where we're looking at that microbiome. So indicators that we can tell what's happening with our microbiome. So we know that the Bristol stool chart is an awesome resource, because our best indicator is actually our stools. And I love poo. I talked about poo with everyone, because it really is. It tells us what's going on inside our gut, which, you know, can be difficult to really know what's going on. So knowing what your stools are doing, constipation, diarrhea, heartburn, burping, you know, all of these digestive symptoms that we know would be common indicators. Transit time, we talk about that and how we can measure it. And then actually the slide after this in the module is looking at other indicators that are not digestive, because it's not just digestive stuff that gives us an indication there's problems with our microbiome. So content from module 3, which is first trimester, so 29 weeks to term. So I put term, I don't put 40 weeks because, you know, there's some issues around what term is, and I don't actually believe 40 weeks tells us what term is. There's some, anyway, that's part of the thing, part of one of the things we discuss. But we're looking again at nutrient status, review of diet and supplements, what we might need in third trimester, common deficiencies, what's happening with your microbiome in third trimester. This is when it gets crazy interesting in pregnancy, like your whole microbiome through all your different body changes in preparation for birth and breastfeeding. And it's pretty amazing. So how we support that, the specific probiotics we should be taking. They're different depending on what you need. There's certain probiotics for GBS prevention. There's great probiotics for breastfeeding outcomes. There's some for allergy prevention, and ones for gut health in general. So all of these things, we can really individualize and target which stuff you're needing to support your particular microbiome and your particular pregnancy outcomes. Again, that stress and toxin and medication avoidance, the vagina microbiome, which is one of my favorite topics, and it's super important for, that first exposure to infant. Again, what baby's doing in third trimester. Talk about if you're planning a home birth, if you're planning an elective C-section, the things you need to do around that. Placenta encapsulation, which is something I've learned about. I'd heard about it, didn't know much about it. It wasn't around so much when I had my babies. I do remember, though, that one of the midwives suggested I could eat some of my placenta, and I'll never forget that. So I think placenta encapsulation is awesome. I've got an expert who's been doing it a lot and has done this for thousands of mums, and there's an interview in that extra resources about it. So you can learn all about it, how to do it safely, what are the benefits, what are the, there's some doubts around it, and it helps explain all that. And then that preparation for birth, being empowered, knowing your rights and responsibilities, and what maternity care looks like in Australia. And this is a preparation module, it's really getting ready for birth, and that preparing for an empowered birth, which would be the opposite of a traumatic birth. And this is a big part of the program is doing that. So just one of the slides looking at maternity care in Australia, that we need to get better at this. If you're looking at the current stats, we've got 40% induction rates, and they're not all medically needed. So induction, that's in synthetic oxytocin induction. There's a school of thought around that being the beginning of the cascade of intervention. And obviously sometimes they're super important and they save lives and we need them, but they also happen unnecessarily a lot of the time. We've got 1 in 3 births being a C-section delivery. So again, not always necessary. We have fear of birth at an all-time high. We've got formula exposure in hospitals, up to 30% in public and up to 70% in private hospitals. Now, in the later modules, we look at what that does to the microbiome and how that increases risks of things like allergy and obesity. And and how it's actually happening sometimes without mums knowing, how we can avoid that happening if that's important to you. 1 in 3 births that mums report birth trauma in our maternity care system. So that's not okay. We need to change that stat. And then 1 in 10 go on to suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. And again, like it says at the bottom of the slide, this is not meant to scare you. This is meant to prepare you, right? And so this whole program is about how that we change these stats. Let's empower mums. Let's inform them how to navigate the system so these things don't happen. One of the biggest parts of that is that midwifery continuity of care, and I talk about that through all the different modules. This is another example. I put 2 slides in from the 3rd module because I love to talk about the vagina microbiome because it's so important. But so this is what we talk about, in that 3rd trimester, then the microbiome gets flooded with the lactobacilli organisms, and because nature intends a swathing of lactobacilli through the vagina canal, and also other fecal flora is in there as well. But so if there's dysbiosis or an infection, there may not be as many good bugs present as what we would want. If there's a C-section, then we have that absence of exposure to these good bugs, and we also have the antibiotics, and that impacts that. Talk a lot about antibiotics and what they do and how we can attenuate if you have to have them, or how we can potentially avoid them, and then using those right probiotics to increase the good vagina bugs, which is very, very effective if we get the right probiotics. Avoiding GBS is something else we can do with these specific vagina microbiome probiotics. So yeah, that's an awesome one. Moving on to module 4. So I was going to go straight into 4th trimester, but I couldn't because there was too much to put into that 3rd trimester. So I broke it up and made a birth and early feeding module. So again, we go thoroughly through that birth map, like you'll hear it talked about as a birth plan, but we're talking about it as a birth map, what we need to include, how we develop that with your health, ideally your midwife or your doula, or perhaps it's an OB for you, but I do strongly encourage finding a midwife that you trust, because that's where we get the best results, and we've got the research and a bazillion stories to show that. Birth mode, how that impacts the microbiome, birth experience, things, we go through all of this: delayed cord clamping, skin to skin, breastfeeding complications, the breast milk microbiome, early infant microbiome. This is, incredible what happens in these early stages in that first week in the infant microbiome. Do you need an LC or other breastfeeding support? Things like having a postnatal doula early in those stages can be really helpful. And then what happens if you have trouble breastfeeding, or you don't get the right support, or for whatever reason you can't, then how do we optimize formula feeding and really get good microbiome support? Again, what's happened with medications? What have you been exposed to? How do we attenuate that? And then if there has been stress and trauma in birth, what we do, and then what to expect in the first few days. So it's one of my favorite modules. It's got awesome stuff in it. This is just an example of that sort of birth plan or birth map, I'm calling it. So this is, just an example of a birth plan, and these are the kind of things that we need to talk about. And then the difference of what a birth map is, more fluid. It's about having informed choices and making informed decisions, and being prepared for that along the way. I can't believe phone's going off. So we look at things like spontaneous labor and what is term, like so many stories about women being encouraged to have an early induction for whatever reason, and quite often it's not necessary. So recently, one of the big triggers to making me do this whole course was a friend of mine she was older, she was over 40, but she was only 42, I think 41 or 42, and she was encouraged, this was her second baby, she was being encouraged to be induced at 38 weeks, and her OB had said to her, well, that's what we'll do. And when she said to me, she wasn't my client, she was just my friend, so we hadn't talked about it before, and she was later in pregnancy, and he said I have to be induced at 38 weeks, and I was like, you actually don't, you don't have to be, it's your choice, and she was, like I said, she was older, but she was super fit. It was her second baby, her risk versus benefit of, so the risk of having a stillbirth after 38 week goes up, but the individual risk for her, it wasn't as high. It would have, anyway, so, but not being given a choice was what upset me about that. And, so she went back to her OB and said, oh, I actually want to go to term. And he goes, oh, okay, cool. And one of the really interesting things about this story is she knew when she was due, because she knew when she conceived, right? And so they had a date that was going off her last period. But, she was older and her periods were a bit irregular, and she knew that she'd conceived on this certain day because it was asked for her husband's birthday or the night of the birthday, and that was the only time that had happened. And she said this to her OB and said, no, I know I'm actually not due then anyway, because I know when I conceived. And he goes, yeah, well, we don't count it like that. And she goes, yeah, but I know. And they're like, yeah, well, that's not how we do it. So what they were telling her was term, and when she should be induced, it may not have even been 38 weeks, it may have been earlier. So, that's just an example of a very, very common story about what happens in, inducing when it wasn't necessary. So, if we can do spontaneous labor, then that just really does set you up for a better outcome. Active labour, what that is, pain management in labour, positions for birth, pelvic examinations, episiotomy, water immersion, all of these things we make sure that you know what they are. You've talked to your care provider about them. Things like, delaying exams, and that early skin to skin, that first hour of skin to skin with mother and baby is such a crucial time for not just for microbiome, but the hormones and all of that. And we talk about all of these things as well. How to do the tests in hospitals, that they can actually be done, with the baby this way instead of lying on their back. We can delay exams. We want to avoid formula exposure if we can. And then that first bath, delaying the first bath and not washing mum's chest and all of these things, and what that means and how that improves outcomes. So, so if we can just do these things, we have such better chance of better breastfeeding outcomes and better bonding with mum and all of these amazing things. So we know about this stuff. We need to teach mums about this stuff. So the module 5 is actually what we call the 4th trimester. Now, this is a concept I think that's becoming more talked about, is the 4th trimester. So it's actually this period from 0 to 12 weeks. And I love the term the 4th trimester because it makes so much sense to me. I'm going to show you a slide after it that helps explain. So we talk about going home, about being prepared and having a 4th trimester plan as well, as important as is your birth plan or birth map. So let's call it a 4th trimester map. Nutrient status supplement review. We talk about diet. We look at the infant microbiome in this stage, what's happening in that first 3 months. It's a super important time for that, what we call the origins of disease. So, that setting up of the immune system. We make sure you've got support services. We look at sleeping, feeding and allergies. I've got a sleep baby expert, a newborn baby sleep expert interview that we can go through. But there's a baby wearing, so the baby carriers. This interview, I was like, oh, I just was going to share an article, and then I contacted the author of the article, and she was such an expert on the baby wearing. And the interview, her explanation, she shows us, how we do it, goes through all the different carriers, and it's amazing. You'll learn so much, and how beneficial baby wearing is to all of these outcomes as well. What is orofacial myology and why we need to know about it? Another thing I've learned about from an LC that I work with, and that's so amazing and important to understand. We start to talk about postnatal depression, risk factors, signs, symptoms, what postnatal depletion is, and that's super important, an introduction to vaccines and how to be informed around your choices. And then again, who do we need on our team in these sort of early stages? This is the slide that I love that explains the 4th trimester. So it's a time of major transition, right? For baby to come from womb to world, and for mother, especially with the first baby, from maiden to mother, but even for seconds and thirds and however many babies, it's still that real transition period. So if you have a look at the things on the left, you've got these physical and emotional changes. Your brain is being rewired. It's completely rewired. You need support. We used to have a village in this stage to help us raise a baby. You might still be in pain. You might not enjoy all of it. And this was a big thing for me. I remember when my babies were little, I really struggled a bit in this stage because I found it difficult, and I didn't have that. I expected to just, I was in love, of course, with baby, but I was also a bit like, I don't know, I was a bit bored. I didn't love it like I thought I should. And once I admitted that and talked to people and talked to my village and friends and stuff, I realized that was quite normal, that was part of it for some people. You definitely get sleep deprived in this stage. Being your baby's expert, that self-care and recovery is so important in this stage. You're in recovery mode as well as transition mode. So having that kind of support and how that looks to you, and we determined that before. And in these early stages, your job is to eat, sleep and feed the baby, and that's all, if that's what we can do. And it's difficult in this world. We think we can go back to work, or we plan to, anyway, and that can just make this 4th trimester stage a lot harder for everyone, for mum and baby. So if you have a look at this picture, I love this. This is the baby loves to be close to you, you know, like this is what it was like in the womb. This is what it's like in the world. And then if the babies are in your arms, and again, why baby wearing is so important, and skin to skin. So skin to skin through the first trimester can help so many things. It's amazing for breastfeeding, even if you're having issues, and for colic and reflux and all of the different things. We'll talk about all this stuff as well in this first trimester module, fourth trimester module. So module 6 is when we look at babies 3 to 6 months. So we're looking at nutrient status and supplements again. We're looking at gut health and microbiome, what's happening for mum and what's happening for infant. And, you know, what are we looking at? Has there been exposure to disruptors? You know, has there been things that have disrupted the microbiome for mum and baby, and how we can really attenuate that and support that and really boost it back up? Again, we look at the stress toxins and medications, that ongoing breastfeeding support, what happens in that 3 to 6 month stage. So this is when we get a bit of a drop off with breastfeeding numbers. Like, so the recommendation is exclusive breastfeeding to 6 months. We don't get very good results at that. I think it's about 12% or something of exclusive breastfeeding to 6 months. So, you know, we know how important that is for those long-term outcomes. And there's lots of stuff happening in these stages that's causing breastfeeding problems, you know, so we'll talk about that. Allergies and intolerances, we also discuss that in that fourth trimester one, because that can start when they're babies. Development, growth and percentiles, and how we navigate that. You know, it's not all about percentiles, it's a lot of other ways to assess babies' development and growth, and we can often get caught up in percentiles, and, you know, there can be a lot of freaking out around percentiles, and if they're not, you know, staying in them, or they're going from one to the other, and that's quite normal, and percentiles are just a guide, and we need to remember that. Sleeping and teething, we talk about vaccinations again, and then what happens if, you know, some of the common things that can happen in these stages, and then again that postnatal depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. These things can still happen up to 12 months, so we need to be aware of them. And again, who's on our team? If you have suffered trauma, if that did happen to you in the past, you've got a history of mental health you know, stuff, then we need some extra person on your team to help care for you through those stages and help to look out for risk factors and signs. So this is, again, one of the slides that we look at about the infant microbiome in this stage. We talked about those disruptors, you know, was there breast milk or no breast milk ever? Was there colostrum? So in one of the modules, we talk about that, expressing colostrum, and if there's a C-section or just for whatever reason, if there might be separation, then you can actually have previously expressed colostrum and frozen in syringes that can be given to baby if there's separation. What happens with iron fortified food? So it's very common in this stage from 3 to 6 months to start with iron fortified cereals. You know, it's still a thing that mums get told if the baby's not sleeping well, or, you know, that to start feeding them earlier, and, you know, introducing solids before 6 months. And, you know, we talk all about that and what the issues are, you know, around, and how, what's been happening as far as these disruptors and how we support the microbiome. So that's an example of that. Now we're moving on to module 7, which is we're looking at the bubs from 6 months to 12 months. And so a big part of this is that sort of introducing solids, you know, food allergies and what can happen through this stage. Again, a really good look at what's happening in the microbiome for mums and bubs. I've got introducing solids twice. There we go. I'll fix that before I record this module. Got an expert nutritionist colleague and friend of mine who's amazing with this stuff, this introducing solids, and some really great resources. Okay, so I seriously need to fix the content in this one anyway. Food and supplements for healthy immune. So this is when we can sort of start to introduce stuff that you're giving to baby as well. Previous to that, we just want to be giving stuff through mum if we can, if we're breastfeeding and we're, you know, like we're not messing too much with immune systems on using supplements and stuff in bubs. Stress and toxin reduction, again, we start to think about the environment in this one, that ongoing breastfeeding support, when should you wean. Super interestingly, when they've done archaeological studies and those kind of things, that we would, as human mammals, have fed anywhere up to 7.5 years breastfeeding for ultimate growth and development outcomes, immune system, those kind of things. So yeah, I got a question the other day from a mum who's breastfeeding twins, and I can imagine that would be quite demanding, but she wanted to know if there was any evidence of the benefit to continue breastfeeding once the babies were over 1, and there absolutely is. So again, this first 1,000 days period, this origins of disease, the building and training of the immune system, the exposure to pathogens and like environmental toxins. There's a real protective role of breastfeeding that happens while you continue to breastfeeding. It's the immune, it's the antibodies, it's the human milk oligosaccharides, it's all of the components of breast milk that are actually personalized medicine for your babies. So as long as so we say up to 2 years is optimal. 2 years is optimal, feeding to 2 years at least or longer. We look at sleeping. Again, we're looking around support around that, and then informing around vaccination decisions and who's on your team. So I love this slide because it does give us a really good, just a general, it's sort of simplifying it, but what the increased risks of having allergies or food allergies or environmental allergies, that should say. So there's genetic factors and then there's environmental factors. So things that are negative impactors like having antiseptic and sterilizing everything and no exposure to environmental organisms. Having a C-section, we know that antibiotics and drugs like acid inhibitors, I've talked about them in other modules as well as part of those things that are disruptors. Was baby given Nexium or Losec or something like that as an acid inhibitor if they had colic or reflux, that has a whole lot of downflow negative effects. Are they a single child? Compare this to having a family with a large size, having pets and having a rural environment. The research shows us that, the support around that microbiome and how that supports the immune development is really important. And then obviously we get down to diet, and if we're getting junk foods and processed baby foods compared to homemade, high fiber plant-based foods, which is all the stuff we'll talk about in the diet support, whether there's breast milk, whether there's probiotics and the right probiotics that are important, and how that then, that relates to the likelihood of having food allergy, the modulation of microbiome and that epigenetic mechanism. So it's pretty amazing, and it really is kind of sometimes that simple, like we want to do all the things on this side and not the ones on that side. So breastfeeding or not, the first 12 weeks appears to be very significant. Was there colostrum given? If mum has leaky gut, then it actually makes it worse because the toxins and things are getting through and passing into breast milk. So again, that's why it's so important we work on mum's gut early. The best evidence we've got for reducing the likelihood of having allergies in the baby is food allergies particularly, is to be breastfeeding and mum eats them and then you're introducing them to baby at the same time in small amounts. So we're modifying that immune reaction via mum. And if you're not breastfeeding, that we can modulate via subs that strengthen and support that gut wall integrity and help to modulate the immune system so that we're not having these excessive immune reactions and allergies and immune issues are so common now. So if we look at this side of that image there, we can see, like we talked about before, 1 in 3 C-sections, the antibiotics in birth is around 50% and sometimes more, so these things are happening, absolutely happening. And, we had that period of the hygiene hypothesis where we sterilized everything. So there was no exposure to these, environmental organism that was helping to build the immune system. So we'll talk about all this stuff as well. And then we get through to module 8. So this is that 12 months to 2 years. So that last stage of the first 1,000 days. And this is where we really focus on building a strong and robust immune system. We're looking at that nutrient status, always for mum as well. Mum might be going on, by this stage thinking about having other babies and those kind of things. So we need to make sure that she's supported as well. That microbiome of mums and babies too, what's happening now, what are we feeding toddler, stress. And again, we start to look at that building biology, so the environment, things like EMFs, Wi-Fi, things that might be impacting that immune system, like, you know, mold damage in houses and stuff like that. So we talk all about that, some awesome resources around that. Again, medication avoidance, and a big one is this, is those, you know, acid inhibitors and antibiotics. So I can tell you that my kids are 18 and 20 and neither of them have ever had antibiotics, but I've had to be quite staunch about a few times where they've been prescribed antibiotics, and I've made an informed choice to not give them because they were prophylaxis. So they were given for prevention of, just in case something might happen a couple of times with the kids. And I was like, well, I know what infection looks like, and I know, you know, what a fever is and those kind of things. And so I'll take that prescription, but I'm not going to give it to them unless I feel like they need it. And that, yeah, at 18 and 20, neither of them have had any. So it's something that if you are informed and if you have the support of a good health practitioner, then, you know, there's quite often alternatives that you can use instead. We have great, you know, herbal antimicrobials and those kind of things that we can use instead are good. We set up that healthy microbiome in the first place. The likelihood of them needing antibiotics is less. One of the best, you know, the most effective roles of a healthy microbiome is preventing infection in the first place. So, you know, they're less likely to get an infection. Again, we talk about that information around vaccines. One of the things around that vaccines is, you know, there is a risk of vaccine injury, and there's safer ways to do it. You know, the vaccine schedule, doing it when babies are not unwell, that's really important. You can break up some of the big ones. You can make sure you're using some antioxidants and, you know, those kind of things that can help prevent vaccine injuries. You know, you really support the immune system. There's lots of different things that you can do. So we can talk about that as well. Again, that microbiome, diet and lifestyle long term, we look at toddler sleep, and then that ongoing support around mood. And then, you know, who else do we need on our team, and, you know, what's happening in your life now, you know, looking at more babies, or, you know, have you got a bigger family, and, you know, all of those things. So that wraps up all of the modules. Oh, this is just that example of the slide that we're talking about building that strong and robust immune system for your child for life. So I love this picture, this image. It's amazing because it's so, you know, what we need to do. And at the time of recording this, we're in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I just love the fact that, you know, that this is this kind of stuff that we can do that gives you a strong and robust immune system to reduce your likelihood of getting infections in the first place, and, you know, building that really robust human so that they can make it through this life, because there's, you know, there's going to be more of these kind of viruses, and we're living in a world that's got, you know, lots of toxins and lots of onslaughts to our, you know, gut microbiome. And if we can build a really robust one in these stages, we really do impact those lifetime outcomes. So just things like breastfeeding as long as we can, avoiding antibiotics. There's specific supplements that are amazing. You know, we do it by case, but generally things like zinc, vitamin C, E, A, and D, not sterilizing everything, having a pet, having that nutrient-dense, plant-based, diverse diet, sunlight and activity and screen time and those kind of things, healthy homes. So yeah, that's just an example of one of the things we talk about in Module 8. So just a couple of other slides I just wanted to finish up on. So one of the big themes is having that empowered birth, you know, and empowering mums to not have excessive stress or fear around birth, because fear is one of the biggest things that blocks the natural production of hormones that are needed for a physiological birth. So there's a whole cascade of hormones that happens for a physiological birth, and that's like a birth, you know, for wanting of a better term, than normal or natural, because, you know, that can invoke things that if it didn't happen for you, that wasn't okay. But, you know, we really want to set up a physio as much as a close to a physiological birth as would be, and stress and fear are big blockers of that. That's again one of the reasons midwifery continuity of care is so effective, because you feel safe and you feel empowered. And think about if we were birthing in nature, you know, back when it used to be, if we weren't safe to give birth, we'll stop labor. We can stop labor if we don't feel safe. Then that the hormones of, you know, cortisol and adrenaline and noradrenaline, and if they're too much at the wrong times in labor, then then that can actually stop labour. I was listening to a story the other day of, you know, this was a doctor talking about that sort of the hormones that happen. It's actually in the resources in one of the modules. I can't remember which one now, but how going to hospital at the last minute is a really good way, you know, as late as you can, because you've got through that all of the normal physiological, you know, hormones without having too much of that sort of adrenaline and fear-based stuff, because that can block. And so there's lots of stories of people mums getting to hospital and then labour just sort of stopping. And that's again another where you see that they'll give you a synthetic oxytocin if that happens to bring it back on. And again, that can be the beginning of that cascade of intervention and ending up in more likely to have an emergency C-section and, you know, all of those other interventions that we talk about. And that power of belief and support and trusting your care provider gives you that feeling safe and believing in yourself. And I love this saying, she believes she could, so she did, you know, and we talk a lot about these sort of how we empower ourselves. A couple of others, I'm so grateful for my ability to grow this healthy, beautiful baby inside. You know, you have more strength than you know, more calm than you believe, more power than you imagine, more courage than you dream. Again, these kind of things, you find stuff that really resonates with you and empower yourself. And I know this was my experience, and I was only young when I had my kids, and I had some crazy belief in myself, and I was like, I can do this. I am. And I had a friend recently ask me, you know, what was my best, you know, saying or affirmation, or what I was saying in my head. And I was that I am woman, hear me roar, you know, like I was so, you know, this is what we do. We grow babies, we have babies, we can do this, you know, like, and I didn't have any fear. I had a crazy belief in myself, and that's what I want to try and help other mums have. So pricing, so I really want to make this affordable. It's super loaded program. Like, it's 8 hours of each module is 8 hours, is 1 hour, so it totals in 8 hours of all this kind of stuff, but plus all these extra resources, so you don't have to go looking for the right book or the right breastfeeding course, or, you know, like, which is the best one. You know, I've done all that for you. I've done all that research. I've connected with all the amazing health professionals in the midwifery fields and the lactation consultants and the Australian Breastfeeding Association and all of these kind of resources. So they're all there for you. If there's extra courses, if you need something else, you know, if you need extra specialist stuff like that, maybe the core and floor, or there's a course in about pregnancy after loss. So if you'd suffered from miscarriage and how to do that, that's not my area of expertise, but I've got an amazing colleague who does specialize in that area, so, you know, you might benefit from that. Everyone that works in this field wants to give and help, and you know, we all want to make it affordable and accessible to mums. So, you know, this is the plan. So all of the 8 modules would be $397, and they're going to make payment plans, you know, like it can be, I haven't set it up yet, but it's going to be affordable, you know, and you know, so, and you can actually buy the individual modules as you go if you like, but like I said before, you'd want to do those first 5 modules, you know, while you're pregnant, definitely, up to 4th trimester, because we want to be prepared, and then you could have a break and, you know, start the last 3 later. And all of this is going to be really simple. It's access to all the modules and resources via password protected files on a dedicated website, because it's going to be really, really simple. Here is my contact details. You can get in touch with me for any questions. Like I said, there'll also be a free there's a free Facebook group for anyone to join, with lots of awesome information about the first 1,000 days, whether you're doing the program or not. And then if you're doing the actual program and you've paid for any of the modules, you'll be joined into that closed Facebook group where you also have access to me and have questions answered. You know, if it is something that we need to work with together, we can also, you know, sometimes we'll need to do individual stuff as well, you know, like depending on what your cases are, you know, like I've had people with, you know, really bad digestive issues that we really need to, you know, do an extra consult. But, you know, there's so much information in here, and there's, you know, so many resources that I want to provide that, you know, that might be just all you need. So thank you so much for listening to the webinar. If you have got any questions, then please get in touch with me. I'm going to finish the recording now because I'm going to post this, but I will also stay on the webinar if there's any questions.